All right. Well, before we go any further, I thought that we would kind of update ourselves on just get a grip on some of the previous news before we go to the new news. And there's also a timeline. We asked somebody, or asked anybody actually on the show, put together a timeline of some of this. Well, our good buddy over there, Thurston Howell III, put together at WrestleNomics, put together a timeline of the business news and basically all of the things that went on behind the scenes from the point of time that the NDA was signed. That a blanket description, it covers everything. January 28th, 2022 is when Janelle Grant signed the NDA releasing Vince McMahon and the WWE according to the complaint that she's just filed, right?
Right.
So that was the start of this thing. And he put together a timeline of the shit, which we're obviously not going to read everything, and you can't. And it would be, you can, but not on the air verbally like this. It would be very confusing, but we encourage everybody to. But the fucking thing is, in hindsight now, you see a lot of these people involved who, it looks like Stephanie, at least, has been trying to stay away from Vince for the past 2 years. Whenever he comes, she show publicly, oh, it's great to have Vince back, and she's fucking gone, right? That's happened on a couple of different occasions. And when you and I were talking right before we went on the air, it was only 2 months after this NDA was signed that the anonymous email came from the person who said that they were the friend of the unnamed at that time former WWE paralegal. And that was WrestleMania week. And the very week that the board of directors gets this news that there's an NDA and starts all these investigations and starts all these balls rolling, that was when Vince came back and I use in quotation marks, wrestled at WrestleMania. When he had that deal where they had the thing set up with McAfee and Austin Theory, right? And then Vince, through whatever twists and turns they ended up taking, listen to our review on YouTube. He inserted himself in it and it fucking stunk. And then poor Steve Austin had to come out and give Vince the stunner that broke both of his legs, in pieces, it looked like. He just collapsed into a goddamn melted heap. So he has been, but that was the first time that the news comes to the board of directors. Vince puts himself on WrestleMania and beats Pat McAfee. And then when the Wall Street Journal, April, May, June, 3 months later, reports this, when they find out about it, that the board has been investigating all this shit, that's when he came out on SmackDown and Raw those 2 weeks. And like, here's John Cena, and here I am. Fuck all of you. But in the middle, and I'm jumping all around, but in the middle, in May, Stephanie stepped down, says she's taking a leave of absence to spend more time with her family. Apparently the family that didn't already work for the company. Right? And so she was gone at that point. She was still on the board. And when Vince tried to come back, she was one of the people voting for him not to come back. And when he came back anyway, she fucking welcomed him back and fucking quit again.
And remember, she went on TV and led the audience in a thank you Vince chant.
No, actually, remember, she didn't lead. The audience started doing that. And I think I said at the time, she stepped on his chant. I don't think she started it. Let's go back. Enterprising sleuths that have more time on their hands than we do. Go back and see it. I think the people started it, and I don't know that she did any encouragement at the least, but I think she may have stepped on it. She stepped on the chant. Maybe I'm thinking of another one.
And I think it's important to differentiate two things here at the start. One, as you mentioned before, the friend of Janelle Grant got in touch with the board of directors with that letter. And then separate from that, it appears that someone on the board of directors got in touch with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes. And there's also, if you go down in this timeline, as soon as Vince does power his way back, he fires, or I don't know, can you fire the board? He moves the board of director people out, and a couple of them quit. And one or two of them had gone on record as saying that we didn't agree with this and we don't want to be here. But you can tell who is. So Stephanie takes the leave of absence, when she, after WrestleMania that year, and the rumor tried to be floated that Vince either removed her or she wasn't doing a good job or whatever, which that didn't get a lot of traction. But then when all the NDA news breaks, all of a sudden Triple H replaces John Laurinaitis in talent relations, which was the reverse that had happened a number of years ago when Vince put Laurinaitis back in Triple H's spot. And Vince retired the same day as Triple H replaced Laurinaitis. And Brock walked out of the TV taping the same day. And then Steph came back when Triple H was back in and Vince was out. And then 2 weeks later, they fire Laurinaitis. But then by 4 months later, Vince is back in. Stephanie and Triple H both vote no, but it doesn't matter because he's got all the pull.
So does Nick Khan. And they even write a letter to him explaining that they don't think it would be beneficial to the company to come back. And he says, in my position, he can insist on whatever he wants because he had the power. In my position, I feel that I have to be there for this sale of the company. I will not accept anything unless I'm part of it.
Basically saying, no, nothing will happen unless I okay it. So I'm going to fuck all you guys. But anyways, and Stephanie, welcomed him back and then left for fucking good. And it also, if you add up a couple of the bonuses and stock sales and whatever that Vince, after the whole sale and merger and TKO deal happened, Vince has sold stock for or gotten as some type of bonus over $750 million and still owns 12% of the company. It's not enough to cause what he caused before, but that's the point, is he's gotten $750 million out of this deal so far. He owns stock in a company that's worth much more than that. And they're where they're at right now because he didn't pay $3 million to this woman. And
let's talk about that a little because it's such a puzzling thing.
What kind of an idiot is he?
We've talked in the past about this is what Vince McMahon has done to a lot of people outside of sexual misconduct allegations, doing business with them. Here's the deal. All of a sudden you stop getting the payments. He finds some kind of way out of the deal. You did something he didn't like. He screwed over Larry Matisic, Mike LaBelle, Stu Hart. The list goes on and on. Not even counting the predatory business practices that he did against the NWA and Crockett Promotions. But he always finds a way. If it's good for him, he's either going to get out of the deal or get a deal, only if it's good for him. He pays her. She says in the complaint, she didn't understand why he couldn't just give her all the money all at once. And he said, I think it was for like estate planning or something. He just couldn't.
No, it was a cash flow or
cash flow. That's what it was.
Spread out the
cash flow.
But now, here's the thing. We have also it's been reported, I hesitate to say we found out or anything factually these days anymore, but it's been reported reliably that these NDAs, all of them that Vince signed, because this was for $3 million, but the investigation that this one snowballed into, remember they found 17 or 18 million to women and then another fucking $5 to $7 million he gave to fucking Trump illegally. That we see more similarities. Deals don't apply. He always finds something. But anyway, and he had apparently Jerry McDevitt draw these up and have these deals signed without the knowledge of the WWE as a company, is what the story is now being told. So that's why when they found out about them, they had to not only revise their earnings or their financial report or whatever it was, but also if the company didn't actually know that these were signed and that this was going on, then that does alleviate some of the culpability, liability, whatever the fuck, especially of this new company now. But
They made him executive chairman.
Could this be the first time that Jerry McDevitt has fucked something up or allowed something to be, fucked up and legally that bad?
Vince has lost before. A lot of people forget that. Jesse Ventura kicked his ass in court. Bill Eadie beat him in court. Again, I mentioned this to you recently, the Six Pack by Brad Baluchian. He talks to Bill Eadie and he tries to get something about the settlement. Whatever he got from WWE, he wouldn't say anything. He just smiled and said he's very happy. And that took 10 years. The lawsuit was like from 1991, it was settled in 2001. Vince McMahon drew that thing out for 10 years. And Bill Eadie ended up winning in the end, apparently. So, Jerry McDevitt isn't immune. It all depends on this specific situation and the case and who's willing to fight.
Well, but also when you think of the gravity of the two suits, I got Bill Eadie over here. I got this massive international news story disgracing me over here. It seems like they might have taken a little more care.
The other thing is we only know what we know. And the Wall Street Journal reported that there were these other deals. I mean, some of them go back to like 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. He was making deals back then. We don't know how far back these go. It's puzzling that these weren't personal NDAs. It was company-wide, which he shouldn't have done. But the biggest problem always comes down to the fact that even though it was a public company, Vince still ran it the way he always did. It was his company. And he could do whatever he wants at any time, and the shareholders let him do it. That's the fact. He was able to spend and do whatever he wanted. The shareholders let him do whatever he wanted.
And by the way, when you look at some of the people, because of course there's the only people identified in the lawsuit are Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis, but obviously because of the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Brock Lesnar's not looking too good, and we'll talk about his current status in a second. But the thing is, everybody's wondering who the other corporate executives are and et cetera. Corporate officer number 1 or number 2 or whatever the case. And, is it now even more significant than just new ownership? And again, I'm not even saying just because I don't like the guy. I'm not saying that he was doing any wrongdoing, but I'm saying he's a fly on the wall close enough to the inner circle. He might have known if some alleged wrongdoing was being done. Kevin Dunn leaves at the end of the year with 1 week's notice, right? Didn't he?
Was it even that
announced
much?
Around Christmas time? Yeah, I'm going to finish up the end of the year.
I don't know how much notice he gave. He was just gone one day.
Some short period of time. Well, they announced when we covered it. I said, well, Jesus Christ, it's fucking holidays. It's the end of the year, even like 5 days later, whatever. That's a month before this lawsuit is filed. One would think that if Kevin Dunn was one of the closest people to Vince, and you would think that you would know as a person involved in something like this, if something was bubbling before it happened. You think Kevin wanted to get out before he got any on him just for being around? I don't know.
The Ashley Massaro stories, and there's various ones going around, and I believe her attorney has recently spoken, done an interview somewhere, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it. But I saw something recently with Paul London, who I guess was dating her at a time. And he said that she hated going on the plane, but Vince and Kevin Dunn always wanted her on the plane. Not just Vince and Kevin Dunn. You say Kevin Dunn's a fly on a wall. He was Vince's top lieutenant for years. Got away with everything. I mean, we heard stories that were just stupid. Like, I know someone who had a meeting with Kevin Dunn. He started cutting his toenails in the middle of the meeting. Just a complete dirtbag move. But it's not a safe thing to assume that everyone didn't have an idea there was something going on, even if they didn't know exactly what. If there were mistresses hired to work in the office, and right away people knew, how did they know right away? How did they know any of that? All these other things happening with talent, anything that happened with talent, that shit goes around amongst the talent pretty quick. So it's Laurinaitis who was in charge of talent relations at various points. Kevin Dunn was the head of production. We don't know what he knew. You know, the big thing that's going to be interesting is going to be Triple H and Stephanie. And I hate to say it because I like Triple H's wrestling product. But if you're that close to Vince and you're around him nonstop for years, not just in the arena, in the office, and all this was happening, and people knew he had a mistress in the office who got a job she didn't deserve, or deserve may not be the word, wasn't qualified for. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Who knew what and when is the thing that's going to probably bring down a bunch of people.
Well, that's why, yeah, with Kevin Dunn, again, not saying he was pretending, and I can't even imagine trying to participate in anything with Kevin Dunn. My God. Be like trying to get romantic with fucking Willard. But if anybody knew something was going on, he had to be one of the people who knew, just because of that proximity. And from reading the complaint, I worked in the office or darkened their doorstep in 20-something years. But some people were around there for a long time. Others have been newer additions. One of the unnamed executives, or however described, I think I might know who that might be. And from my interaction with him, I would think that if he thought Vince McMahon has a girl on the side and he's putting her on the payroll, he would have rolled his eyes and held his nose and gone along with it, whatever. I think if he'd have known almost any of these details, you'd have needed shock paddles to bring him around, because he was an older white man who would have also been aghast. That's a word that doesn't get used a lot. Aghast at the obvious jeopardy that it was putting the company and the participants in, because he was a halfway level-headed individual. So, but if a hypothetical person, that wouldn't be Bruce Pritchard, by the way. I'm not talking about Bruce.
Okay, I thought you were talking about Bruce.
No, I said level-headed.
That's why I was confused for a second.
Yeah, well, no, it wouldn't have. No, a person whose name wouldn't even be known to the vast majority of the wrestling fans. What?
That's a part of the story. Vince all of a sudden bringing back people that the company got rid of to surround himself with, like Bruce Pritchard, like John Laurinaitis. People were around him that other people in the company are like, why is this person here? They're only here because of Vince. He wants them here, not because of anything they're adding to anything. He just wants his confidence.
And see, that's suddenly it looked like that he was bringing in the padding to surround himself with, rather than his own daughter and his own son-in-law. And it was the only time that they gained power, retained power, or weren't fucked with in some kind of way, was because Vince had taken NXT away from Triple H. And then, he was out for a period of time with the heart issue, which, I've said probably the last thing that I think he would have want to thought about when he was having heart problems was Vince's fucking issues. But, anyway, we'll talk about Triple H when we talk about The Rock later on. But with Stephanie, is there any public sighting of her? Is she anywhere doing anything? I'm not talking about in wrestling, just is she, taking the kids to soccer games, or does anybody know what she's doing?
Hey, another interesting thing that's in the timeline here that you talked about. Remember, after all this first went down, Vince, Stephanie, Triple H, and Pat McAfee went and sat ringside at a UFC event.
Ooh, you're right.
Some sort of show of force. It wasn't just Vince going to check out an event with Pat McAfee, who's a star. He brought Stephanie and Triple H with him. Unless they were negotiating with Endeavor in the back on that night. What was that about?
Well, that may have been part of the thing that was about. And okay, and here, Brock Lesnar. What the talk about somebody shitting in their own post toasties? He is not only a WWE legend and the biggest per capita per match box office attraction, probably maybe now except for The Rock or whatever. And he's also a former UFC champion and an MMA legend. The same company now owns both, and they can't fucking put him out in front of people. We've now come to find out that he was pulled from the Royal Rumble. The spot that Braun Breaker had was going to be Brock Lesnar. And actually, because the match was laid out, they're saying all the shit that Braun Breaker did was supposed to be Brock Lesnar. And now you look at it, you can see it. And you can also see that Braun Breaker did it pretty much as good.
Yeah, it worked out well for Braun Breaker, but that would have been Brock Lesnar's spot. The thing would almost, and then Dominic Mysterio eliminating him.
Yes, because apparently they were going to have Brock kick the shit out of Dominic because he's got heat at Elimination Chamber and then do something at WrestleMania. So he got pulled from 3 pay-per-views in a row. There's a new WWE game. I want to say a card game, did I read? Is that code for one of the fucking electronic devices the kids have these days, a card game?
I'm not sure what game you're talking about.
Well, there's a new WWE game that Brock Lesnar was in that the toy company said, well, we're not going to leave him in it, and they took him out of it. So 3 pay-per-views and a goddamn game, that's already cost him, what, $2 or $3 million? And they haven't even mentioned his name yet. But boy, I'd like to see him come out and say, well, prove it's me, because I think they can.
What if he goes for the Laurinaitis defense? I'm a victim in this too. My boss was telling me things to do. And
that would be the fucking Thor, the god of thunder, said I was fucking victimized by the fucking Dr. Don Blake.
On the topic of Brock, to go way back and taking your personal feelings out of it because other people felt differently about her than you did, specifically Vince and Kevin Dunn. When Sable first left, she sued them for sexual harassment, remember?
Yes.
You know, who knows what was really there and what really wasn't. They were obsessed with her.
Well, and
that's Brock's wife.
Well, that's what I was going to say. But then there's the O. Henry there. We got O. Henry'd, because then I could understand if the story was that after Brock and Sable got together, then Brock hated Vince because of whatever his wife may have told him. We don't know. But no, Brock becomes close enough to Vince that when Vince retires, Brock walks out, and Vince is setting, allegedly, Brock up with play dates with the office personnel.
And you have to wonder.
That seems to be a contradiction, doesn't it?
You have to wonder, is this because Vince and Brock are especially close, or did Vince have this kind of relationship or try to pull this kind of thing with top guys that he was negotiating with? Is there anyone else? I mean, there's a lot of guys he's been close to over the years. Hogan lived next door to him in Greenwich at one point. Him and Shawn Michaels were real tight. Him and Brett, before everything went bad, were real tight. There are a lot of guys that had really close relationships with Vince. A lot of guys that did when Linda was around and active.
But perks like this, I use perks in quotation marks because of the alleged offering in the contract negotiations, etc., didn't come up from Vince back then. There's no way any of those guys. Well, I mean, Bret Hart, you wouldn't even say that to, for fuck's sake. He would have goddamn probably punched Vince early. But there's no way that you would have been able to keep these guys from saying that at one point or another if there had ever been. And I mean, this specific story, yeah, Vince tried to get me to fuck his girlfriend. Or his office employee, or his massage therapist, or fill in the blank. Or shared picture. Vince showed me nude pictures of this girl that he's having this fling with. That's never been a part of the canon of the mythology, has it?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know everything, but I had never heard that. But what we had heard is that Vince had affairs in the office. Remember, his assistant was Emily Feinberg, who was a Playboy playmate. And she ended up getting screwed. I don't say get screwed, but she testified against Vince in the steroid trial. And Laura Brevetti's ex-husband, she was one of Vince's attorneys, went up to Emily Feinberg pretending to be a reporter for 60 Minutes, got her whole story, and then she got destroyed on the stand.
Yeah.
So Vince, that was with Linda there. He was sleeping with his assistant.
Well, yes, but he wouldn't say, hey, Brutus, come on over.
What do you think, we'll talk more about it because it kind of is involved with every single thing we're going to talk about with WWE TV coming up, but Triple H, WWE, their product has been the best it's been in a long time. The TV has great segments with confrontations that we love and that we talk about here. He's doing his thing without Vince. Everything seemed to be going well. We'll talk later about how The Rock kind of gets thrown into that and changes everything, but he's finally got his chance to do it, and he may get dragged down by this if he's involved in any way.
Well, but I've got to think, because they are dealing with each other, the Nick Khans and the Triple H's and the Ari Emanuels, and they're dealing with each other, I would think, on a regular, daily, or almost daily basis. And they know more than we do, whether they want to admit it or not. And they've got to probably have formulated some opinion in a positive fashion about Triple H's involvement or lack thereof before they've let him get this far.
They made Vince the executive chairman. There's no way that Endeavor wasn't aware of some of these allegations, or at least multiple issues with Vince and the company and sexual harassment and NDAs. And they still made him executive chairman.
What does the executive chairman do?
He's the executive chairman of the board of directors, so he's the head of the board of directors.
So what would he actually be able to do in that, or have been able to do in that company before he resigned it?
Oh, I don't know what exact power
Who could he tell? Who could he say, you motherfucker, go goddamn lift that fucking barge and tote that bale?
I mean, technically, he was the boss of Dana White and Triple H in one respect.
But I'm asking, how much was ceremonial to be the executive chairman to placate this fucking eccentric, demented senior citizen that we're trying to get this, and he's going to die soon. We won't have to worry about him because he's almost 80. But in the meantime, would he have been able to call up Dana White and say, hey, that fucking main event you're plugging for the next pay-per-view, fuck it. Change it. I don't like you. He wouldn't be able to do that.
But they were asked about all these things. There was a CNBC interview with Ari Emanuel next to Vince, and he was asked about it, and he said he wanted Vince there. They needed Vince there. Dana White said good things about Vince. I have a tough time thinking these guys were not aware of something going on. And they were all praising Vince. Did they think this was all going away? Did they think
that's what I'm saying is I think both these things can happen at the same time. I think they figured we've got to give, because he wouldn't accept, his ego wouldn't accept anything less than some type of position like this, but much of it may have been ceremonial, so they knew he couldn't fuck the company up, and they were figuring either they didn't know the extent of it, or they were figuring it wouldn't come out in public, the extent of it, and people get over NDAs and hush money all the time, just not with details like this going on. I would have to think that even that company, had they learned the extent of this, would not have,
If they get before a jury, can you imagine how much they're going to reward Janelle Grant in punitive damages? I mean, you talk about all the money Vince has, and that's going to come up in that trial. He's going to lose a good chunk of it. Okay,
well, speaking of losing money, we talked about Brock is out a few $1 million just so far, just from, being alluded to in this. With Laurinaitis, how deep can he, how big a settlement could he pay? Certainly not like Vince McMahon, because remember we talked about him on the previous program. I said, how could he have been that fearful for his fucking job? Because he's been a wrestling executive, major company for most of the past 20 or 25 years, whatever the fuck. My God, he's not going to be in a box under the overpass. That's not if he's living a goddamn normal life and not the subject of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. So I don't buy that he was so fearful for his job that he would not perpetrate crimes on behalf of Vince's say-so, even when Vince wasn't present. But I can believe that he would squeal like a pig under a gate at Vince or about Vince McMahon if he's staring in the face of a 10 or $15 million or who knows what kind of fucking judgment in a civil suit, which is why that apparently he's already, I was a victim here. Have you heard about his lawyer?
I mean, I saw the quote from the lawyer. I don't know anything else about the lawyer.
Okay, I'm not one to tell tales, and I'm not one to prattle on, tell tales out of school or cast aspersions on people. So I encourage everybody, do your own research. I'm not saying that this is completely valid information, but a lot of people saying it. Apparently on Twitter, I've seen people screenshotting the fucking reviews or the comments from wherever it came from. The attorney that is representing John Laurinaitis is apparently not well regarded at all by many of his former clients. And they're saying, what a lazy piece of shit, what a crook, he stole money, he fucked me around, he did this and that. I'm not saying these things about this apparently shyster lawyer because he might get on the phone and call our shyster lawyer and it would start something. I'm saying if anybody's got some spare time and wants to do the research on the guy representing John Laurinaitis, see what you come up with, is all I'm saying. But a lot of negativity.
And Laurinaitis is a guy that's not well thought of by too many people. No, like beyond you, like Jim Ross has made statements in the past publicly. Teddy Long has made statements in the past publicly. Various talent have made comments. He wasn't well thought of. The way
you phrased it. He just wasn't well thought of. Like, goddamn sardines on fucking pizza. He just wasn't well thought of.
Like, I've never heard anyone ever say to me, he does a good job. Give him a break. No one. Everyone thought he did a bad job. Everyone thought he was unqualified for his job. And then you hear all this.
Well, remember at first Stephanie liked him because he was a smiling, younger, good-looking guy in a suit that replaced Jim Ross, who was telling Vince, the chairman, the truth about her creative performances. And then he morphed into whatever he fucking became.
Can you imagine what Stephanie thought when Bruce Pritchard got rehired? She's the one who got him fired for pulling a gun on her or whatever.
Now don't say that.
Waving a gun around like Yosemite Sam, whatever he was doing.
He didn't pull a gun on Stephanie McMahon. Apparently, he did have a gun in his briefcase for reasons that I've not ever been told or understood or whatever.
But
he
doesn't have heat. What was he running around with a gun for?
Who knows? Well, he was in the office, right? You're talking about heat with the fans. If I was here, I could go in a fucking arena of 15,000 people and feel safe, but I wouldn't want to go in the office and turn my back without. But nevertheless, so that's Laurinaitis. He can't afford to pay a big settlement. And he's got a lawyer that apparently one would presume by the way he's been described that he will represent anybody for a fee and figure out something to either, maybe he's a personal friend of Johnny's, who knows? And this is some of the other things that I've been thinking about. What's going on right now since this complaint has been filed and made public, the lawsuit by Janelle Grant. I have questions still on what the fucking arrangement is here. And maybe we got another clue on who the friend of Janelle Grant was, because the story is that Janelle Grant was living in this building. Vince was living in the penthouse. Janelle Grant knew the manager of the building. And the manager of the building said, well, you ought to talk to Vince McMahon. He's a billionaire. He might give you a job, right?
Right.
And then later on, after these things happened to her with the WWE, apparently she managed, or I guess, did she become the building manager, or was she running the building in some fashion?
I don't know if she took his job. That's a very interesting question. I hadn't thought about that.
Was it a his or a her?
I'm not sure, but they had said that she had taken over. She had been working in the building she was living in.
Yes. And so did she take over, or was she handling something else for the main manager? Was the manager, were they girlfriends? One would think that Janelle Grant would not have confided in some old guy that looked like fucking, Bookman on what's happening or whatever.
Well, we don't know. We don't know who the building manager was.
Well, but I'm saying maybe they were females of a similar age where they could bond or, whatever. But so, and that's the thing is that here's what I don't understand now. And again, how old is Janelle Grant? Now, you said newspapers reported she was 43, but I'd heard that she was in her 20s, and the picture of her looks youthful. But now people are saying she's in her. Why is her age up in the air? Not that she did anything wrong with that, but I think you don't need specifics. Here's where she lives if you want to go bother her. But clarifying her general biography enough to see how she clearly ended up in this odd situation, I think would help humanize her even more and make people understand what fuck's going on if it's sympathetic to her case. And so did Vince move? Is he still living there? Is the manager mad at him? The building manager? If the building manager was friends with Janelle Grant and gets a job, says, go talk to Vince, and Vince gives her a job, and then the building manager finds out about this, was the building manager the one that emailed the board, the friend of Janelle Grant?
That is an interesting question. We know Vince has a residence in Florida, obviously, and who knows what other places, maybe a place in Manhattan or something.
He don't spend a lot of time in Florida when he's doing these fucking business deals.
Does he still have that condo in the Trump building that Janelle Grant lives in? That's a very interesting question.
Yes, so that's what I'm saying is, if I was the building manager and I was really truly friends with Janelle Grant and I really had a genuine idea to try to help by saying, well, talk to Vince McMahon, he, could give you a job. And then Janelle Grant confided in me that this had gone on. Wouldn't I feel like shit? And wouldn't I think, well, somebody needs to fucking do something about this? Right? So then wouldn't I be the anonymous friend that emailed the fucking board of directors? But at the same time, when the NDA was signed, was Vince still, did they have to pass each other in the lobby? Were they still living there? Did she move? But she couldn't have moved, because why would you move away from a building that you're then going to work managing? And the story why that she had to give up that job was that she was so upset and disturbed by what had happened that she was depressed and couldn't leave her apartment for weeks at a time. So I can't think that the building manager that put her together with Vince, did he then or she then flip and side with Vince McMahon? But then how did Janelle Grant get the job? We need details.
Yeah, we don't know, because it says just a friend of Janelle Grant's, and if she has friends and she's going through something like this, you got to think some other people may be aware that something's up.
What I'm thinking, somebody needs to talk to the building manager and find out what the building manager knew when.
What I'm really interested in that we may never find out is who leaked this to Wall Street Journal, because that changed everything. That was the game changer.
I think it was somebody on the board of directors. It could have either been one of these civilians that weren't in the wrestling business that were on the board of directors that were just mortified at conduct like this, or it could have been fucking Stephanie. I don't know. I still don't know. Because would that be sitting well with,
We haven't heard anything from the family. I mean, Triple H had that press conference, didn't say anything, but obviously Shane, Stephanie, and Linda, who's still making appearances for, various Republican events, living by herself in Florida, not living with Vince.
That's right. Linda, somebody sent a poster she's speaking with every right-wing Republican wingnut. How can are these people in such a bubble of their own delusions that they don't read the paper or watch the news? How can she poke her face out there after this?
Boy. There's a conspiracy theory, and I only call it that because it's unproven, going around that maybe Shane McMahon was the person who leaked this to the Wall Street Journal. Remember, he came back. When did Shane McMahon come back to the Royal Rumble where he had some kind of incident backstage? And then his dad said, don't come back, and he almost got into a fight with Brock. When was that? Right? Is that the details you remember?
Yes. Oh, God damn it. We got to listen to our own YouTube channel. We covered it at the time. It's been a couple of years ago. That's when Shane blew his snavets out.
Was that 2022? Yeah, that was 2022. He was paid over $700,000 for the Royal Rumble in 2022. But backstage, I have a story here. Backstage chaos and clashing with Brock Lesnar saw him quietly let go by his father. Wow. See, that's another big question.
Remember, also, a lot of the guys had been mad that he had inserted himself into the match and the whole 9 yards, and then he, went down in spectacular fashion.
He's the one I hope one day says something, because he's the only one who ever walked away. For whatever reason, and now all of this makes you wonder what else could have been going on, but he walked away and tried to do something on his own. He would eventually come back.
I told you, he was my favorite.
You always said that. At this point, he may be my favorite, too. But I have a tough time thinking all of this wasn't known by some of these participants, or a good amount of this wasn't known by a lot of these participants.
The detail, I need to know the amount of details now. Here's another thing. I've thought of something that nobody else has asked about. The physical therapist, right?
Right.
Who are his patients right now?
Why is he unnamed?
I mean, this is a physical therapist that leads one to believe, medical professional, person actively seeing clients, patients, or whatever. What does he adjust your back and give you a shit shampoo? Can somebody review his fucking license? Just give it a little asterisk at the Better Business Bureau. Shouldn't people, if there's somebody out there that's engaging in this behavior with alleged clients, shouldn't we know about it?
Who's the physical therapist? Who's the celebrity doctor he was working for that Vince sent Janelle Grant to?
Well, there you go. And either what is the doctor's celebrity or what celebrities is this doctor seeing? Because as George Carlin said, somewhere in the world is the world's worst doctor, and someone has an appointment with him tomorrow morning. I think we ought to have this knowledge shared with us. And you mentioned Bruce earlier. I think he's toast because he's been so close to Vince and with the company so long, they're just going to get rid of him because. I think that while I believe there is no way that he could have been involved as a participant in this, I think he mounted probably a vigorous effort at remaining willfully ignorant. But I think there's also
the story of his life.
Well, there you go, and he's excellent at it. And I think that there's some level of Vince may have shielded him from discussion of this on a personal basis for plausible deniability. Just for situations just like this, he kept his feathers numbered. Because if Bruce didn't know nothing, didn't see nothing, didn't hear nothing, didn't talk about nothing, Vince would say, well, Bruce can be there when I'm not. And then, as Ronda Rousey said, he can be Avatar.
But if Vince is showing everyone things on his phone, and we only know that based on what Vince said in text messages, Bruce is the only person he's not showing stuff to?
I think Bruce would have treated it like a pickle on his plate and looked out the window. Nope. Bruce has the thing. Bruce always had a saying, I don't rib, don't want to be ribbed. That's it, meaning he is not going to rib anyone or mess with anyone's belongings or whatever the fuck back in the 80s WWF style ribs, and he don't want to be ribbed. Don't rib, don't want to be ribbed. I think he would extend that, don't fuck, don't want to be fucked.
I don't know how he doesn't survive, I don't think, but also, how does anyone ever want to hear him again? All this guy ever did was defend Vince McMahon, defend everything Vince McMahon ever did, give that side of the story. And now all of a sudden he's not going to say anything about this? We'll see. He's got a lot to own up to about all of this. He got brought back to be Vince's
confidant. Well, he doesn't have to own up to anything.
He has to talk about what he knows and what he doesn't know.
He has to spill his guts, but he doesn't have to own up to it.
Well, I think a lot of people have a lot to answer for. Kevin Dunn, Bruce Pritchard, John Laurinaitis, Stephanie McMahon, Vince McMahon, other unnamed executives, the other people on the board of directors, including those who resigned, giving rather benign statements about, we had a problem with things that were here. Not really letting you know.
We've got busy schedules. The kids now, they're doing soccer.
And Endeavor. Again, Nick Khan was one of the people that voted for Vince not to be brought back. Nick Khan didn't know what was going on. Endeavor knew what was going on too, I would have to think. So every one of these people is going to have to answer for this. And I'm sure they're all dreading it. But it's coming. That day is coming. It's a reckoning. It's the reckoning Vince McMahon never thought would happen. Boy. I gotta get David Schultz on the phone, find out how he's doing nowadays.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute, you haven't heard him hooping and hollering and shooting his shotgun off?
I'm sure he's having a party.
That brings us to Vince to close the most unsympathetic defendant since Donald Trump, and with him on the stand in a civil trial, just with the texts and just the demeanor that he's probably going to have and the way he's going to come off, he's cooked. He's still got the multiple NDAs for tens of millions of dollars. Are any of them valid?
Are any of them enforceable? Yeah, that's the other thing, because I guess they were, again, they're company NDAs. They're not Vince McMahon NDAs.
No. That's the thing, is that from the report that I'm hearing, the company may be covered, but the company didn't do them. Vince had them done by McDevitt privately rather than going through the company.
Oh, that's right.
legal.
I said it backwards.
But they cover the company, but they potentially, in that case, would cover the company without the company's knowledge.
Right. Which is not legal.
That's why I said they can be challenged. And I mean, I don't know if anybody's going to be anxious to give the fucking money back, or if they thought there might be a danger of that. But if McDevitt did them personally, and that's Vince and Jerry McDevitt. Poor Jerry wanted to retire. Maybe Vince is going to be floating in the wilderness on his own after this. And maybe if McDevitt did draw these up, maybe he's not the guy to defend this suit anyway.
Yeah, maybe he wants to retire before this trial, because this may not be one you can win.
Well, but Grant's lawyer says others are coming forward. What are these stories? And they have shown they're not hesitant to put some out. And there's a federal investigation going on that's criminal, not civil.
And they got his phone. There it is. Because he's texting, I said this last time, he's texting all these things to Janelle Grant, and they're hideous. What was he sending the other participants, like Laurinaitis and the physical therapist and Brock Lesnar? We don't see those text messages. We only see the sweet nothings that he's sending to someone who he's abusing. But we don't see...
And you know what? That's the one thing. Trump never put anything in writing. That was how he got away with everything. Vince didn't even learn from his billionaire buddy.